My name is Bristol Kane. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 12 years, I poured every second of my life into building my family's children's clothing business into a $9.8 million brand. Last month, at our 20th anniversary gala in Greenwich, my parents took the stage, looked straight past me, and announced to 400 guests, "We're proud to say that Lennox will be taking full control very soon. She is the future of this brand." The applause was deafening. I excused myself, walked upstairs to the executive suite I still had the code for as COO, and opened the safe. Inside was their new will signed 3 months ago. Everything, 100% of the company, the house, the accounts, went to my younger sister Lennox. My name appeared exactly once, $200,000, as a gesture of gratitude. I stood there holding the pages that erased 12 years in a single signature. If you've ever had the two people who raised you wipe you out like that, you know the feeling. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe with notifications on, because what I did next made them regret it for the rest of their lives. You're not going to believe this one. To understand why I stood frozen in that hallway the night of the gala, I have to take you back to when I was 18 years old. My family owned Kane Kids, a small chain of high-end children's clothing boutiques right on Greenwich Avenue in Connecticut. The windows were always dressed with pieces most people only saw in magazines: hand-embroidered bonnets from France, cashmere coats lined in silk, tiny leather shoes handmade in Italy that cost more than some parents made in a week. Then the financial crisis arrived without warning. Suppliers cut us off. Wealthy clients stopped spending, and one morning the bank delivered a formal demand letter for full repayment of a $2.8 million loan we had no way to cover. I came downstairs and found my dad, Dennis Kane, sitting motionless at the kitchen table, while my mom, Brenda Kane, folded and refolded the same foreclosure notice with shaking hands. I had just received a full scholarship to Parsons School of Design in New York City, the kind that changes lives. My acceptance packet was still sealed on my childhood dresser, but watching my parents face losing everything they had poured 30 years into building made the decision for me. I called the admissions office, thanked them through tears, told them family needed me more, and drove home that same afternoon with everything I owned in the back of my car. The first stretch was pure exhaustion. I opened every store at 7 steamed racks of clothes until my arms ached, worked the floor until closing, then locked the doors and stayed behind to figure out how to keep us alive. Almost no one in retail understood social media yet, so I taught myself everything from scratch. I set up our Instagram on a cracked iPhone, photographed outfits on the backroom floor under a single lamp, wrote captions until dawn, and learned to stretch a $20 daily ad budget into actual sales. When suppliers refused new orders, I borrowed the company van, drove into Manhattan at 5 in the morning, negotiated with wholesalers in the garment district, and carried boxes back myself so the shelves never looked bare. Bit by bit, we clawed our way forward. We paid down the most dangerous debt, refinanced what we could, redesigned the stores with brighter lighting and better flow, launched our own private label collection, and began opening new locations one careful step at a time. Each new lease signing felt like a victory we weren't sure we deserved. Dad and Mom made certain everyone knew exactly who had made it possible. At staff meetings, vendor dinners, grand opening parties, they would wrap an arm around my shoulders and say the same words in front of whoever would listen. "One day, all of this will be yours, Bristol." They repeated it so often that employees started exchanging knowing smiles whenever the phrase came up. I deliberately kept my official salary low, around $80,000 a year, after taxes, enough for a modest one-bedroom apartment and a normal life without luxury. Every bonus, every profit share check, every extra dollar the company earned in strong seasons, I immediately signed back as a formal shareholder loan. The family attorney prepared proper paperwork for each transfer, notarized agreements, 4% interest repayable on demand, all filed neatly in the office safe. Over those 12 years, my reinvested earnings totaled $2.9 million of my own money, sitting inside the company protected by contracts I never once imagined I would have to use. I kept every document organized in a labeled folder because I trusted my parents completely. I trusted them with every sacrifice I had made. Over the next 12 years, I turned Kane Kids from the edge of bankruptcy into a brand pulling in just under $10 million a year. We became the quiet obsession of every hedge fund wife and private school mother from Greenwich to the Upper East Side. Our limited edition cashmere coats sold out in 14 minutes. Celebrities dressed their newborns in our hand-smocked layettes and tagged us without being paid. Vogue Kids ran 6-page editorials on collections I had sketched on red-eye flights. We opened 8 flagship stores that felt less like retail spaces and more like private clubs, complete with fresh flowers, espresso bars, and discreet security who knew every regular client by name. I negotiated directly with mills in Biella, flew to Portugal twice a season to approve every stitch, and built a design team that other brands tried to poach yearly. The numbers spoke for themselves. Inventory turned faster than ever, profit margins climbed steadily, and the waiting lists for our seasonal drops became a status symbol in certain zip codes. While I was living out of suitcases and surviving on airplane coffee, my younger sister Lennox Kane, who is 6 years younger than me, finished college and moved straight back into the family house on Round Hill Road. She had always been the one who got the bigger bedroom growing up, the brand new Range Rover, at 16 the summer programs in Paris, while I was counting pennies in the stockroom to make rent. After graduation, nothing changed. Her days revolved around brunch reservations at Le Penguin, influencer photo shoots in our own stores, always after hours, so she didn't have to deal with actual customers and shopping trips to Manhattan that somehow always ended with Mom's black Amex. Then one Tuesday morning, Dad called me into the corner office and announced they had decided to create a brand new executive position, exclusively for Lennox creative director, $120,000 a year plus full benefits, a company car, and an unlimited expense account for inspiration trips. She had never once opened Adobe Illustrator, never placed a single fabric order, never worked a holiday rush. I stood there holding the quarterly reports I had stayed up all night finishing and managed to say congratulations. My voice sounded like someone else's. Lennox lasted exactly 19 days before the disasters began. She missed a critical production deadline because she was at a 3-day yacht party in the Hamptons and lost track of time. She told a Bloomingdale's senior buyer that her 4-year-old looked a little chunky in our sample sizes, then laughed it off as a joke when the woman canceled the entire 6-figure order on the spot. She scheduled a photo shoot in our Madison Avenue store during peak Saturday hours, kicked paying customers out, and left thousands of dollars in clothes strewn across the floor for the night staff to clean up. Every single time, I was the one who got on a plane with apology gifts, rewrote contracts at 3 a.m. in hotel rooms, and begged partners not to walk away from deals we had spent months negotiating. Dad and Mom refused to see any of it as a problem. They framed her Instagram posts in the corporate office and told the staff Lennox was bringing a fresh Gen Z perspective. When I tried to explain that we were hemorrhaging relationships, Mom waved me off and said Lennox was still adjusting and needed more support. Dad added that I had always been the responsible one, so surely I could handle a few extra fires. The staff who had been with me since the darkest days started leaving. Our head buyer of 9 years took a job at a competitor and cried when she handed in her notice. The Scarsdale store manager asked for a demotion rather than continue reporting to someone who spent meetings scrolling Instagram instead of listening. Our senior pattern maker, a woman who had taught me everything about grading sizes, retired 6 years early because she couldn't watch the company she loved turn into a playground. Every resignation email landed in my inbox first because someone had to keep the remaining teams from falling apart. I covered every gap myself. I worked 7 days a week, rewrote entire collections. Lennox abandoned halfway through sat with accountants until midnight, making sure we still hit margin targets and smiled in every meeting, while Dad praised her natural eye for color, and Mom bragged about how many followers Lennox had gained that month. I told myself this was just a phase, that eventually they would see who was actually holding everything together, that blood was thicker than favoritism. By the time the 20th anniversary gala invitations went out, Kane Kids was financially stronger than it had ever been in its history, but inside the company the atmosphere had turned poisonous. Longtime employees spoke in hushed tones about golden child syndrome. Vendors started asking me in private if the rumors were true, if Lennox was really being groomed to take over. I laughed it off every single time and repeated the same line I had heard my entire adult life. Of course not, the plan has always been the same. I was starting to realize the plan had never actually been written down anywhere. About 2 years ago, everything finally crossed the line I never thought I would draw. Lennox had been handed the lead on our most important partnership meeting of the year, a $1.2 million holiday placement with one of the biggest luxury department store chains in Manhattan. I had spent 8 solid months courting their buying team, flying back and forth, sending lookbooks at 2 in the morning, adjusting margins until my eyes burned. The morning of the presentation, Lennox texted me that she was running a tiny bit late because she had stopped for a quick photo shoot in Soho with some friends who had 500,000 followers each. She walked in 3 hours late holding an iced oat milk latte, sunglasses still on, and asked if they could just push everything back a little. The buyers waited exactly 7 more minutes, then stood up and left. By the time I got the cancellation email, I was already on a plane racing from Los Angeles, where I had been begging a fabric mill not to cut us off. I spent the entire red-eye rewriting the forecast to absorb $1 million hole. That was only the worst incident, not the only one. I was already working 90 to 100 hours a week for months straight. I would land from Europe, go straight to the office without changing clothes, stay until security turned the lights off, then open my laptop again in a hotel room that all looked the same. Sleep became something I caught in 20-minute patches between flights. My hair started coming out in handfuls every time I washed it. I lost 18 pounds in 10 weeks because eating felt like another obligation I couldn't fit in. My doctor handed me a prescription for anxiety medication that I never filled because the pharmacy closed before I left the office. My boyfriend Shane, the man I had been with for 4 steady years, finally reached his limit. We had planned a weekend away for our anniversary, the first real time off I had taken in 18 months. The morning we were supposed to leave, Lennox called in sick from a hangover, and I canceled the trip to cover her store visits. That night, Shane sat me down on the couch we had picked out together and said the words I had been terrified to hear. "I can't keep being second place to a company, Bristol. I love you, but I'm tired of waiting for a life that never actually starts." He packed while I was on an emergency call with accountants trying to move money around to cover the hole Lennox had just blown in the budget. I came home at 4 in the morning to an empty closet, a stack of his keys on the counter, and a short note that simply said he was sorry. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since I was 18. When I tried to talk to Mom about how close I was to breaking, she listened for less than a minute before cutting me off. "Lennox needs more support right now," she said, reaching over to smooth Lennox's hair while my sister scrolled Instagram on the couch behind her. "You've always been the strong one. You'll figure it out." Dad didn't even look up from his phone when he added that I was being dramatic, and Lennox was just going through a phase. They were planning her surprise birthday weekend in Aspen and asked if I could handle all 8 stores while they were gone. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. My suits hung off me like they belonged to someone else. Colleagues asked if I was sick. Harper started showing up at the office unannounced with containers of soup and forced me to eat at my desk between meetings. She was the only person who saw the dark circles and the shaking hands and told me straight that I was killing myself for people who didn't deserve it. I kept waiting for my parents to notice. I kept waiting for them to remember who had flown coach to Portugal at Christmas to save a production run, who had given up every bonus for 12 years, who had turned down promotions from competitors, because this was supposed to be my legacy. Instead, they hung framed prints of Lennox's Instagram posts in the corporate hallway and told the staff she was the future face of the brand. That was when I understood the rules had never been the same for both of us. They never would be. The night of the 20th anniversary gala, I wore the most beautiful dress I had ever owned, a custom midnight blue silk column that took 3 fittings and cost more than most people's rent. I stood in front of the mirror in the hotel suite and actually believed this would finally be the evening they acknowledged everything I had done. The ballroom at the Delamar Greenwich Harbor looked like something out of a magazine, crystal chandeliers, catching the light white orchids everywhere. 400 guests in black tie drinking vintage champagne we had paid for with profits I had personally fought to protect. I walked in on time, smiled for the photographers, greeted every vendor I had negotiated with for years, and took my seat at the family table right between Mom and Dad. Lennox sat across from me in a borrowed designer gown, scrolling Instagram under the table. When dessert was served, the lights dimmed, and a short video montage began playing on the huge screens. Old photos of the first tiny store on Greenwich Avenue, newspaper clippings from the crisis years, images of new opening celebrities wearing our clothes. My face appeared in at least half the clips, smiling exhausted beside every milestone. I felt my chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then Dad and Mom walked onto the stage together, arms linked, beaming under the spotlights. Dad took the microphone first. 20 years ago, Brenda and I opened a little shop with a big dream, he began, voice thick with practiced emotion. Mom stepped forward next and continued the story of how hard those early days had been. They talked about family legacy, about the future of the brand, about passing the torch to the next generation. And then Dad looked straight at Lennox, who finally put her phone down, and said the words I had waited my entire adult life to hear, only they were not for me. We are incredibly proud to announce that Lennox will be taking full control of Kane Kids very soon. She is the future we have always dreamed of for this company. The room exploded in applause. Cameras flashed. People stood. I sat completely still while the sound rushed past me like I was underwater. Lennox waved and blew kisses like she had just won an award she never auditioned for. I don't remember standing up. I only remember pushing through the crowd, murmuring excuses, finding the private elevator that led to the executive suite we had booked for the weekend. My legs carried me on autopilot. I still had the master code because I was technically still the COO. The hallway was silent, the party noise muffled behind thick carpet and heavy doors. I let myself in, walked straight to the safe hidden behind the abstract painting, and punched in the 6 digits I had known since I was 22. Inside was a single manila folder I had never seen before. On top was a crisp copy of a new will and trust amendment signed and notarized 3 months earlier. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. 100% of Kane Kids shares to Lennox Kane. The Greenwich house on Round Hill Road to Lennox Kane. The investment portfolios, the college funds, the offshore accounts, everything to Lennox Kane. My name appeared exactly once on page 7 under a short paragraph titled Gratuity. $200,000 as a gesture of gratitude for dedicated service. I read it 3 times to be sure the words weren't changing. They didn't. I sank to the carpet right there in front of the open safe, the papers sliding from my lap. The room spun. I couldn't breathe properly. My phone buzzed in my clutch and I almost ignored it until I saw the name. It was my best friend Harper, the one person who had watched me fall apart and never once looked away. I answered on the 3rd ring and managed one sentence. They did it. They actually did it. Harper stayed on the line for 40 minutes, talking me down from the edge, telling me to breathe, reminding me I was still in the hotel and people would notice if I didn't come back soon. She made me promise to take photos of every page before I put anything away. My hands shook so badly the first pictures were blurry. I tried again until they were clear. I sent the entire set to my Aunt Wanda Mom's older sister, the only family member who had warned me for years that blood doesn't always mean fair. Her reply came back in less than 10 seconds, 3 simple words that broke whatever was left of my composure. They really did it, didn't they? I sat on that carpet until the tears stopped, and something colder took their place. Downstairs, the party was still going, people still clapping for the future they had just handed away. I closed the safe, smoothed my dress, and walked back into the hallway with the phone still clutched in my hand. The night wasn't over. It had only just started. The weekend after the gala, I asked for a family meeting, just the 4 of us. I booked the small private dining room at the restaurant we used to celebrate every milestone, the one with the heavy oak door that closed out the rest of the world. I arrived early, laid the printed pages of the new will in the center of the table like evidence at a trial, and waited. Mom and Dad walked in together, Lennox trailing behind in oversized sunglasses, even though it was cloudy outside. They sat down, ordered sparkling water all around, and looked at me like I had called them in to discuss the weather. I didn't waste time on small talk. I pushed the documents forward and asked the only question that mattered. "When were you planning to tell me?" Dad glanced at the pages for half a second, then leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Mom reached for Lennox's hand across the table. The silence stretched until it felt like the room was shrinking. Finally, Mom spoke, voice soft, the way it always got when she was about to say something she knew would hurt. "Lennox needs the security more than you do, sweetheart. You've always been the strong one. You'll be fine, Bristol. You'll land on your feet anywhere." Dad cleared his throat and added the line that ended everything. "We've changed our minds. This is final. The company needs fresh energy, and Lennox is ready to step up." I waited for an apology that never came. I waited for an explanation, a thank you, anything that acknowledged 12 years of my life. Instead, Dad signaled the waiter for the check and said they had a tea time in Rye they didn't want to miss. That night, I went back to the house on Round Hill Road to pack a few things. I was still technically living there between the apartment I rarely saw and hotel rooms on buying trips. I walked into my childhood bedroom and started filling a single suitcase with clothes I actually wore to work. My phone buzzed nonstop first. The company Amex was declined at the gas station, then my corporate email stopped loading, then the shared drive disappeared. By 11 o'clock, every digital key I had ever been given was gone. They had locked me out of everything while I was upstairs, choosing which pair of heels still fit after the weight loss. I stood in the hallway listening to the murmur of the television downstairs. Lennox laughing at something on Instagram, Mom telling her how proud she was of the speech she was writing for the next board meeting. No one came up to check on me. No one knocked. I closed the suitcase, slung my laptop bag over my shoulder, and walked down the back stairs I used to sneak in after curfew as a teenager. The alarm didn't even chirp when I opened the side door. They had already removed my code. I drove to the only place that still felt safe, Harper's apartment in Stamford. She opened the door in pajamas, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without asking a single question. I dropped the suitcase in her hallway and slept on her couch for 3 days straight, waking up only when she forced coffee and toast into my hands. Aunt Wanda called on the 4th morning and told me to meet her for breakfast at the diner we used to go to when I was little. She listened to the entire story without interrupting, once then slid a folded check across the table. $300,000 startup money she had been saving for her own retirement. "You don't owe them another minute," she said. "Build something that can never be taken away." I stared at the check and realized I wasn't crying anymore. Something inside me had finally gone quiet. 4 months after walking out of the house on Round Hill Road, I opened my first pop-up under my own name, Bristol Kane Studio, a 1,200-square-foot white box on Madison Avenue that sold out its entire inventory in 6 hours. Aunt Wanda had handed me a $300,000 check the morning after I crashed on Harper's couch. She said it was seed money, not charity, and she wanted equity when I was ready. I took it, rented a tiny office above a bakery in Soho, and started dialing every contact I had spent 12 years building. The first two people who showed up at my door were Rocco Moretti and Bianca Salazar, the best store managers Kane Kids ever had. They quit the same week I did, walked away from six-figure salaries, and brought 75% of the old VIP client list with them. Those mothers didn't care about family drama. They cared that their children wore pieces only I could source. Within 30 days, we had a waiting list again. We launched with one capsule collection, 12 perfect pieces in organic Pima and hand-loomed cashmere. I designed every stitch myself, sourced directly from the same mills in Peru and Portugal I had fought to keep alive during the crisis, and priced everything 20% higher than Kane Kids ever dared. Year 1, we did $11.2 million in revenue, all direct to consumer, no middlemen, no department store markdowns, no apologies. Kane Kids started bleeding the day we opened. Clients who had been ignored for years suddenly had someone answering their texts at midnight again. Vendors tired of late payments switched overnight. By month 8, Kane Kids had violated every bank covenant. Aunt Wanda, who still had friends at the country club, heard whispers and hired a forensic accountant to dig. What she uncovered was the last piece I needed. Years earlier, when no one was watching, Mom and Dad had quietly pledged their personal shares as extra collateral for a secret $4 million line of credit they used to fund Lennox's lifestyle and plug operating losses. My $2.9 million in documented shareholder loans, senior to every other claim, suddenly became the most secured debt on the books. I formed a new entity, waited for the bank to mark the loan, distressed, and bought the entire $4 million note for pennies on the dollar through a clean third-party purchase. 1 week later, I delivered formal acceleration and demanded immediate repayment. They couldn't pay. The covenants were already broken. Chapter 7. Liquidation was the only road left. The filing was textbook, no fraud, no emotion, just mathematics. The court appointed a trustee, the stores closed in order, and every asset was sold to satisfy creditors in order of priority. My shareholder loan stood first in line. When the dust settled, I owned 100% of whatever remained of the brand, the inventory, the trademarks, and every lease I wanted. 3 months later, the house on Round Hill Road went to foreclosure auction. Mom and Dad moved into a tired 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Stamford, driving a 12-year-old Honda. Their country club memberships canceled their grocery budget, counted in coupons for the first time in their lives. They stayed together, but word is, dinner is mostly silence now and long looks across a very small table. Lennox lost the Range Rover, the black card, and the followers who only stayed when the lifestyle looked expensive. Last I heard, she was working retail at a mall in Westchester. On the exact date that would have been Kane Kids' 21st anniversary gala, I sent one certified letter to the old corporate address. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream stock. Thank you for the 12 years of lessons. Regards, Bristol Kane CEO and 100% owner, Bristol Kane Studio. I blocked every number, deleted every old thread, and never looked back. Some people call it revenge. I call it consequences. Blood may be thicker than water, but contracts are thicker than blood, and the law doesn't care who cried harder at Christmas dinner. I learned that loyalty without documentation is just a story you tell yourself while someone else spends your money. I learned that one day this will all be yours means nothing unless it's in writing and witnessed. I learned that the people who love you most can still destroy you if you let them. Today, Bristol Kane Studio is carried in 40 countries, pays 200 people what they're actually worth, and will never be handed to someone just because they share a last name. I own every stitch, every trademark, every brick of the flagship I opened last month on the exact corner where Kane Kids once stood. To everyone who stayed with this story until the very last word, thank you for listening. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, remember this: your worth is not decided by their choices. It is decided by what you build afterward. I would love to hear your thoughts, your own stories, or what this journey meant to you. Drop them below. I read every single one, and that is how I took back everything that was always mine.